Mic on the left side. Okay. Yep. See, I'm learning. I'm not putting it on upside down or on the wrong face or the wrong way. Anyway. Rob, would you feel comfortable praying us in? Okay. Thank you, Rob. Especially appreciate that prayer about especially filling the legs. We made a good start earlier this summer. Just need to keep going on that. Anyway, well, hi to everyone. Good to have you guys here, and hello to everybody on stream. It is August 11th, and we are most of Austin, the Austin area is fixing to go back to school this week, and I imagine that may be true for a lot of you guys watching online as well. So hope you have enjoyed your summer, and hope you're looking forward to new school season. Anyway, we have been spending the summer studying, going through the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter a week, chapter at a time. And this week, today, we are going to land this plane because we are at the final chapter, chapter 12. And as we've been doing every week, we're going to open by reading the chapter, and then we'll go back and discuss it. Chapter 12, Ecclesiastes. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach, when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire no longer is stirred. Then man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed, and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Well, that's the end. But to go back, um, as we talk about what we want to talk about, what we think King Solomon might be trying to tell us here, um, it does kind of end on a rather dim note in more ways than one. But according to some scholars, chapter 12 is kind of the chapter 12 marker is placed rather arbitrarily. Some scholars think it should be set back a couple of, maybe even 4 verses earlier into chapter 11. So just for the heck of it, we might just back up to chapter 11 and pick up in verse 7. And maybe we can we can see how the continuity of what Solomon's talking about continues. Back in verse 7, Solomon was writing, basically, he was telling us, enjoy life as best you can while things are going your way. Light is sweet. It pleases the eyes to see the sun. However, many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Welcome to old age. Everything to come is meaningless. It's Hebel, Solomon's favorite word. It's and here the context, and of course, when Solomon brings the Hebel word back and uses it, doesn't necessarily mean automatically worthless. Some things are basically have no value or worth to them. But what Solomon is stressing here is that a lot of what we see under the sun, a lot of what we see, touch, feel, taste, through our various senses, it's not permanent. It's beautiful, it's pleasurable, it's a lot of fun, and as Solomon has written earlier in Ecclesiastes, these are blessings from God. God gives us these things to enjoy. Enjoy them when they come, but remember, they don't last forever. Verse 9, you who are young, be happy while you're young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see. Hey, just like I think there were certain beer commercials that were always built around that. Hey, go for the gusto. Yeah, just go after it. Enjoy it, go after it, but, and there's always a but there, remember that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. You will have to give an accounting for how you responded to the blessings that God has given you, how you responded to the various opportunities that you had, the things that you took advantage of and used. Did you use them for God's glory, or or how did you use them? Did you use them to help others? Did you use them, or were you selfish about how you used all these things that came your way? Verse 10, so then banish anxiety, or remove vexation from your heart, and cast off the evil from your body. For youth and vigor, childhood, or Hebel, they're meaningless. They're transitory. They're impermanent. Your youth, your strength, your beauty will last about as long as that wisp of smoke or vapor that you see passing in front of you. And of course, in a grand sense of time kind of way. It's not permanent. And then Solomon continues, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Gee, Solomon, what are you talking about? Well, he's going to tell us what he's talking about. And what follows in the next few verses are a nice little set piece. It's poetic in a description of old age, which if you live long enough, happens to us all. This is what old age is like. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, the clouds return after the rain, and when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, you can interpret that to mean Solomon's talking about your teeth. Yep, that happens. Those looking through the windows grow dim. Might be talking about the eyes there. I remember my eye doctor telling me, hey, man, if you live long enough, you're going to get cataracts. It's just a way of life. That's just part of growing old. What happens when you get cataracts? Well, things kind of start going dim, or they're not as bright as they used to be because you've got this blur, this fuzz that you got to stare through. Very annoying. Verse 4, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, you tend to get a little bit more cautious. Once upon a time, hey, I don't know and I don't care whether I left the door open or the car unlocked or whatever. As you get older, it's kind of like, did I close the door? And not only did I close it, did I lock it? Same thing with the car. Where is it? Is everything rolled up? Because you never know. It might start raining or whatever, and there might be this occasional bad guy who likes to go through and try doors and see what he can get into and get away with. Sound of grinding fades. Your hearing's not what it is, but ironically, it's amazing what old people hear that sometimes even younger people can't. People rise up at the sound of birds. All it takes is the bird call to wake an older person up. But for all that, all their songs grow faint. They really can't hear it or appreciate it like they used to. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms, you can read that to interpret when your hair starts turning gray, because when the almond tree blossoms, it has all these nice silvery blossoms that come out. The grasshopper drags itself along. I have trouble envisioning that because I've never seen a draggy grasshopper. They're hopping around. The joint is jumping. Anytime you got grasshoppers, they're very active. But when life gets to a point where even the grasshoppers are taking their time, maybe kind of just plodding along rather than hopping. What's he talking about? Well, it's possible to get to a point where, your passion for living fades because it just takes so much energy. It's too much energy to get out of your chair and get into the kitchen, that kind of thing. Or maybe even to get out of bed. And man, if I would think if you have problems getting out of bed and you really don't care, you've really got problems. Because desire no longer is stirred. You just no longer have the passion, the love of life. Hey, what will today bring? What will tomorrow bring? I'm looking forward to it. I'm up for it. Solomon continues. Then people, or mankind, then man goes to his eternal home. At some point, it comes time. God calls that person home. Come on in. It's your time. When that happens, of course, it's a sad day for in most situations, mourners go about the streets. So if you live, you should live so long. If you do, this is what you have to look forward to. That youth and strength and beauty doesn't last forever. You can prolong it. If you take care of yourself, keep in shape, yeah, you could stretch those years out, but eventually your body wears out because our bodies are just not built for eternity under the sun. So with that in mind, with the fact that nothing lasts forever, Solomon says, remember him, meaning God. Remember him. Remember the God who created you before the silver cord is severed. Look at these references to death. Before the silver cord is severed, the golden bowl is broken, The pitcher is shattered at the spring, and the wheel broken at the well. What happens when our physical bodies die? The dust, verse 7. Just straight out of Genesis, the conversation God had with Adam and Eve. The dust returns to the ground it came from. You were made from dust, and to dust you shall return. The physical body returns to the ground, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. A little reminder here. Hey, there's something and someone bigger and much more involved than this life under the sun philosophy allows. And then verse 8. Sounds a little bit familiar here. Maybe that's because it's almost a direct copy of Solomon's opening statement way back in chapter 1, verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Your translation may read, hey, vanity, vanity, vanity of vanities. Everything is vanity. Original Hebrew, Solomon is saying, it's all Hebel. It doesn't last. It's not permanent. It's just like that song we learned in Vacation Bible School. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The one that it builds on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount teaching. Basically, there's the wise man who built his house on a firm foundation, on the rock. Foolish man builds his house upon the sand. Comes this big storm. The rains came down and the floods came up. I won't bore you or embarrass you by singing the whole song here, but you know what I'm talking about. The rains come down, the floods come up. What happens to the wise man's house? It stands firm because it's built on a firm foundation. What happens to the foolish man's house? It was built on sand. Foolish man's house goes bam. So there's a lesson learned. Don't build your life on meaningless things that cannot last, things that are that equivalent of the house upon the sand. And with that comes basically to the close. We have come to the close of Solomon's major argument. And for what it's worth, I did a little word count here because there were certain words and phrases that kept coming back at us, like under the sun. These are based on what's in the NIV. Your mileage may vary depending on what translation you use. You may have more, you may have less, but the phrase "under the sun" is used 29 times. Gee, you would think they could just figure out one more way to use that phrase for an even 30, but it's nope, 29. And then the word "meaningless," what the NIV uses to translate Hebel, 33 times. Solomon's trying to make a point here. This is life under the sun. This is what life is like. You're better off being advised of what that kind of life is. But best of all is the person who not only knows what life is under the sun is like, but doesn't base his life on life under the sun. Well, but wait, there's more. There's 5 more verses, so we need to look at those. Starting with verse 9, the verses 9 and 10, kind of interesting. 9 and 10 kind of remind me. I'll reread them real quickly. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also taught or imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. Oh, yes. A whole book of them, as a matter of fact. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. Those 2 verses kind of remind me of whenever you buy a book, a hardcover or soft cover or whatever, you look at the back, and there are all these blurbs. One of them is about the author. Well, we know something about the author here, and then there's always some kind of complimentary blurb, like high praise for it, and maybe back in the day, and the Israel version of Barnes and Nobles, they'd go in and they would buy, they'd buy a copy of whatever they wanted to read, and instead of back of the book, the back cover, this would be on the back of the scroll because they didn't have books back then. So back of the scroll, and high praise for Ecclesiastes, and maybe that they this is what was on there. Maybe, possibly, or to consider it. Anyway, it's high praise here for King Solomon. I don't think he necessarily wrote this unless he was just in a burst of egotism and he wrote it himself. I think somebody else wrote that for him. But there's a couple of more verses. It's like, hey, don't roll up the scroll yet. I have just a couple more things to add in. Let me jot these down. The words of the wise are like goads. They're collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Be admonished or warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. There is a value to the truth, even if sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, maybe even painful to hear the truth. You are better off hearing the truth. You are better off following wisdom and truth because that is an inestimable value. Not only that, given human nature being what it is, being how sometimes we don't carefully pay attention as we should, Solomon sends out a warning, especially to his younger readers or his younger audience. Because this, for all we know, what some scholars believe, and we've talked about this before, this whole text of Ecclesiastes may have started out as a delivery, a lecture, a sermon from Solomon to his key officials, his younger members of his court and government. Basically, hey, I want to pass along something to you. So, if nothing else, you'll avoid making the mistakes I did. But one of the final warnings here that he gives his audience is, be careful what you listen to. Be careful what you read. Be careful of the advice that you follow. Beware of foolishness and lies, outright lies and falsehoods that pose as truth or wisdom. Because properly, there are some things that are just outlandishly false and outlandishly bad advice, but hey, if you dress it up nice enough, elegantly enough, maybe if you have a nice theme song to it, it will become very popular and people will follow along because, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds like the right thing to do. Even if the advice is, go jump off a cliff today. It's what Paul and Peter would tell us later on in the early church, test the spirits. Just because it sounds very spiritual may not necessarily be from God. And then the last verse of part of verse 12, of making many books, there is no end. Amen, said the guy who's been writing a book now for several years. Every time I turn the corner and think, hey, we're fixing to wrap this up. Nope, got to go back and do some more research. But yeah, many books. Hey, check my library, said the guy who keeps buying books, and then suddenly there's all these stacks that he's got to get rid of. Much study. Where is the body? Oh, yeah. How about the night before finals? Pretty bad, yeah. King Solomon were a Texan. He might say, much study. If you study too much, you're going to feel like you've been rode hard and put away wet. That kind of thing. And then the last two verses, the conclusion. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. if you take away nothing else from what we've discussed about for the entire 12 chapters, King Solomon is saying, this is the one keeper for sure. Fear God, keep his commandments, because that is your duty. It's the duty of all mankind. Some translations say this, it's man's all to do this. And why should you do this? Because God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden or secret thing. Even all those things that you thought nobody else knew about, even all those things that you've forgotten about. God saw it. God knows it. God hasn't forgotten it. There will be a day of accounting. So keep that in mind. There will be accounting for all your actions, whether you did them for the right reasons or for the wrong reasons. And God will settle all accounts. Well, I feel like after spending so much time with Ecclesiastes, some kind of summing up would be appropriate. So I'm dating myself because this is kind of ripping off David Letterman. But what I did was I came up with King Solomon's top 10 under the sun rules. I'm sorry that I don't have the drum roll in the background, so I'll just have to read these a cappella. But number 10, everything is Hebel, meaning it's vanity, it's meaningless. It may mean worthless, but it basically means everything under the sun is impermanent. It doesn't last. Number 9, there's nothing new under the sun. It's deja vu all over again. Number 8, people live, people die, in case you haven't noticed. Number 7, who you are and what you've achieved will be forgotten by future generations. Number 6, life is unfair. Sometimes people get the wrong rewards or penalties. Number 5, work, family, and pleasure are gifts from God. Enjoy them while you can. Number 4, enjoy your youth, beauty, and strength, because you'll eventually lose them all. That's more Hebel. Number 3, life isn't much fun when you get older. You should live so long. Number 2, everything is Hebel. Yeah, I know that's a repeat, but just in case you weren't paying attention when I started with rule number 10, I'm repeating it. And then the top-rated rule for living under the sun, get into a good relationship with God early in your life while you can. Well, I would not presume to think I'm smarter than Solomon or that I need to be editing Solomon, but it seems like it would only be appropriate to close our study of Ecclesiastes by throwing in a few more verses, kind of to put things in perspective. Because especially if you can, it's quite possible to just read through Ecclesiastes and just end in a state of depression, because so much of it is bleak and negative. And that's certainly true if you read Ecclesiastes with the mind of someone who just basically is focused on material things. But I want to throw a few verses your way, courtesy of our brother Paul in his letters to the Corinthians. In contrast to the ungodly or the unchristian people who have the wrong frame of mind in approaching life and taking care of problems of life, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16, we have the mind of Christ. So first of all, we've got the mind of Christ. We have that spiritual capability to discern things and deal with them in an appropriate way. Paul also writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, picking up on verse 16. He says, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yeah, we are losing that youth, strength, beauty, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, that is going away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles, all that Hebel, that gives us grief. All those light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen. We don't focus on the Hebel, but we focus on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. And then finally, one last verse, back to 1 Corinthians, closing up chapter 15, where Paul says, "Therefore, my dear brethren, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." And with that, we here on Sunday morning, we officially land the plane on Ecclesiastes. Thanks for hanging with me and going through our discussion and our study. Next week, we're going to shift to the other part of the Bible, back to the New Testament. We're going to begin a look at the book of Acts. And hopefully that will be something that there will be one or two things in there that should hold our attention. Anyway, thanks so much for being here, being part of the audience, and I hope you enjoyed it, got something out of it. If you will, read the first couple of chapters of Acts, and that'll be the basis for our lesson, Lord willing, next Sunday. Have a great week. Pray for rain, and if you got family members going back to school, happy going back to school.